Mephibosheth. Say that name 20 times real fast. Not really. I should know you all are game. David and Mephibosheth had a friendship that David created. His pursuit of Mephibosheth made it possible. Someone had to be the one who initiated it to make a friend. You will find in your life that if you want friends, to make friends, you'll have to be the one who comes forth many times if you want to be friends with someone. This is natural for us because God did this. God came after us when we weren't looking for him, when you think about it, didn't he? He came down to this earth to get us, to bring us into his kingdom, to show us his love and his friendship. This story of David and Mephibosheth just continues David's life of friendships. Mephibosheth's father, Jonathan, was David's friend, and he died in battle. And David was determined that this family was going to go on and that he was going to be a blessing to them somehow. You see, friendship is sometimes saying in your own mind and heart, I may not be receiving fellowship from someone else or their friendship or the blessing they could give me, but I can certainly give it. And you may say, I want to be a friend to someone and I'll take what they give me, but I'm going to give of myself. Because giving of yourself is a blessing to you and to me. David and Mephibosheth's friendship is a friendship that goes beyond the norm. If you ask yourself this question right now, how many friends do I have? How many real friends we keep up with each other do I really have in my life? You'd have to listen to your voice and your heart tell you how many there are. Is it any? Is it a few? They always say women can make and keep friends longer than men can, that men don't have friends for very long. Men are friends with one another while they're in the workplace together or while they have this together or this together, but they don't tend to invest in one another. What we might do rather is to find an activity we like to do, and if somebody happens to want to join us, yeah, come along. But friendship takes deliberation. It takes intention. Everyone remembers King David. He's the same David who killed Goliath, then grew up to be the second king of Israel. It was while the first king, Saul, was still in power that the prophet Samuel anointed David as God's chosen king. You can imagine that didn't sit well with Samuel. This did not make David popular with King Saul at all. I said Samuel, I meant Saul. This was not popular with King Saul at all. Saul's anger and jealousy helped create a civil war between the two. Sadly, should have never happened. To complicate matters, Saul's son Jonathan, son of the enemy of David, as it turns out, was David's dearest friend. In fact, Jonathan and David were so loyal to each other that they made a covenant. They made a covenant promising that no matter what happened, they would always look after each other's families. Now, that's a strong fellowship. Would you make that commitment? If you, my friend, die, I will help to see that you are buried, and then I will look after your children, your family, your wife. That's quite a friendship, isn't it? It would bring me peace and comfort to know that when I'm gone, someone's looking after my wife and checking on my children. No matter how old they get, they need to stay true to the Lord, and someone needs to keep encouraging them in that walk. The scary thing for us is if you feel like while you're living, you look around, you watch, and you don't sense you have friends that are of that caliber, then one of your biggest fears will be, first of all, that you're going to be forgotten, and that your family will also be forgotten or ignored. These are two of the harshest realities for some people, but they should never be true for the Christian, should they? David was going to look after the family of Saul, the one who wanted to hurt him. Saul didn't want David to do well. He was jealous. He was angry. David was going to take his spot when God said it was right. And Saul didn't understand that he wouldn't be able to stop it if it's God's will. You know, in chaotic days that followed for them, all this family, all the descendants of Saul were killed, all of them. There was only one survivor, a young boy named Mephibosheth, who was a son of Jonathan, and he was crippled from his early youth. Dependent, needy, and seemingly forgotten, Mephibosheth seemed to disappear out of sight, and no one was going to miss him or look for him, except for David. David remembered what he'd promised his friend, and he kept his word. We're going to look at the story of Mephibosheth because this story gives us a picture of God's grace to sinners and shows the bond that will carry on to other generations due to strong friendships we create now. That's what it can do for us. That's why it's important. That's why it's worth remembering. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, I will use this whole chapter, we hear these words. David asked, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They summoned him to appear before David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "At your service," he replied. The king asked, "Is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" Ziba answered the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered, "He is at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo-debar." So King David had him brought from Lo-debar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, "Mephibosheth," with excitement, you can tell. "At your service," he replied. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table." Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, "I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like the one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. Brings that up again. He had to be taken care of. Somebody had to be a special friend. You see, this can be annoying, irritating, inconvenient when someone has these kind of problems in their life where they can't take care of themselves. It's hard to want to do it. It's easier to look the other way and hope that somebody else will do it, isn't it? If we're honest. I can't say that I don't sometimes feel inconvenienced, but then I think of who the Lord is after a while. I hope he gets hold of me and I do his will. I listen and still do what is right because it is right. David had made a commitment to Jonathan, and Mephibosheth was more than he probably realized he was going to be, but he got him taken care of. He got crops planted for him so he would be provided for, a place to stay, a place to eat. As I think of all this, there are a few things that come to my mind today. First of all, let's start with this one. Mephibosheth was crippled by a fall. Let's talk about that for a little bit. He was crippled by a fall. In 2 Samuel 4:4, the words say, "Now Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the report of Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened that in her hurry to flee, he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth." Now, you and I might think, well, she was holding him and he fell just to the ground. Maybe he fell off the edge of a hillside onto something very hard and sturdy, something that just broke the nerves or the system in his feet. Who knows? But the fall caused him to be lame. Mephibosheth started out at a distinct disadvantage. His well-meaning nurse panicked, and in her haste to get the boy away from the danger, she dropped him. Because of that, Mephibosheth grew up crippled in both feet. This child would be, for the rest of his days, needing the help of others in order to get by. He was pretty much at the mercy of anyone who came looking for him. And that's why they fled with him, so that David's army would not find him, they thought. But David's not like that, and they should have known. That's not what David had in his heart at all. You know, in much the same way, the human race is crippled because of the fall of Adam, aren't we? We are also at a distinct disadvantage because of our propensity to sin. Morally speaking, we cannot live up to the standard perfection of Christ and God. Physically speaking, we all face pain and sickness and death in our lives, don't we? Sometimes we can't get under control without help from others, medicine or practitioners of all kinds. Spiritually speaking, we cannot make ourselves righteous enough to even approach God. We have the same basic problem Methibosheth had when it gets down to it. Now his story makes sense to me on why the Bible tells this story. Like Methibosheth, we were all crippled by our fall. I get it, don't you? I was crippled by my fall, and the Lord came looking for me. That's how much he cares and loves. Like Mephibosheth, we were sought by our King, the King of glory. I'll go on to another thing this morning as I move on. Mephibosheth was sought by the king. That's an important thing to bring up based on chapter 9, verses 1 and 3. And then the king said, "Is there still someone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?" And Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet." And that's in verse 3. Mephibosheth did not search for the king. This is important to note. He didn't go looking for David. He ran from him in danger, feeling he was in danger. The king searched for him. He was only 5 when he fled the palace, and chances are he didn't even know David. But David made himself known to Mephibosheth, just like God has revealed himself to us. And King David went out of his way to seek out this lost son, when you think about it. Fortunately for Mephibosheth, he sought him out for good, not for his harm. And in very much the same way, Jesus came into the world seeking those who were not seeking him for our good, not for our harm. Jesus said in Luke 19:10, "I have come to seek and to save that which was lost." It says a lot about his friendship for me, doesn't it, and for you, and what he desires. You see, he came all the way from heaven to earth to look for me. Put your name there. To look for you, Matthew. To look for you, Angela, Mike, Harold, everybody here. Call out your own name and imagine that. Put your name in this place. He came all the way to look for you, that you might know him and live forever and be taken care of like he intended to do in the garden before the fall. You know, it's said when Henry David Thoreau, the naturalist, was near death, he was visited by a pious aunt, very church-going and very sure of her faith, who asked him this question: "Henry, have you made your peace with God?" His reply to her was, "I didn't know that we had ever quarreled." That answer revealed profound spiritual ignorance. Too many people are like him. They are utterly unconscious of the fact that they have sinned against God. A lot of people just don't get it. They have no idea that they are in reality lost and separated from him. So they're not looking for him. They don't know that the first step in coming to Christ is to realize that they are lost sinners who desperately need to be found and saved. Just like Mephibosheth was saved by David when he found him and taken care of. And yes, we're looking at it very much in the physical sense with him, but it's meant to be for our spiritual sense that we get this story. At least Mephibosheth knew he was officially an enemy of the king at one point. He knew there was nothing he could do to make things right, because he was told that by the adults. Unless the king came and sought him out, he was doomed to hide all his life. And like Mephibosheth, who was sought by the king, we have been found when we were in a far country too. Far from home yet, still on our journey. This makes me think of a third thing I want to bring up this morning. That's this, based on verse 4. Mephibosheth was found in a far country. How's that fit our lives? David asked a servant named Ziba where he could find Mephibosheth. She explained He explained he was hiding out in a country called Lo-Debar. Lo-Debar was a city east of the Jordan River. The whole area is a barren wasteland, to be exact. And the literal meaning of Lo-Debar is this: a place of no bread. A place of no bread. Mephibosheth was hiding out in a desolate place, in other words. David did not wait for Jonathan's son to come out of that desolate place at all. He didn't wait for him to get out. It would have been easier. He went there to track down the boy instead. It wasn't as comfortable as it could have been on this search, but it was necessary. Like him, we are also in a desolate place, if you think about it. If we are separated from God, a place of no bread, but to that place comes Jesus, and that's what he did for you, who is the bread of life. He came into our desolate place in life, wherever we were, however we were living, whatever we were doing that separated us from him, to give us nourishment, to give us new promises, to give us a real life. You know, God takes the initiative to seek and to find all the time. If you remember the parable of the lost sheep, the good shepherd left 99 healthy sheep to go find one that was out astray, away from home, and lost. One sheep, while he scoured the countryside all night, he kept looking for one wayward lost sheep. What would the Lord do for any one of us, and what has he not already done? That's how God looks for any lost sinner, and that's how David looked for Mephibosheth. Like Mephibosheth, we were actually saved for another's sake. When it gets down to it, this brings me to another thing I want to say this morning. Mephibosheth was saved for another's sake, based on verses 1 through 7. David said to him in verse 7, "Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually." That's his promise to him. David loved Mephibosheth from the very beginning when he met him. Not for his own sake, not for anything Mephibosheth had done to deserve that love. This is what we have to understand. Mephibosheth hadn't done anything yet. But David saw him, saw what had happened to him, knew him enough to know, I can love this guy, and I do. Maybe he reminds him of his father, Jonathan. But Mephibosheth had done nothing to deserve it, but for Jonathan's sake, David was going to love him. His love for Jonathan extended through the generations to Jonathan's descendants. You know, I can understand that because as a grandfather, my love for my daughters extends to their husbands and their children, my grandchildren. And if I live long enough, to their children as well. I love everything connected to my daughters. What about you and your family? Have they ever hurt you? I bet they have, sometime or another. But you can't help it. We were loved so much unconditionally by the Father. It's in us to do the same. And when they're your children and you help bring them into the world, and then your children brought other children in and they're part of your lineage, you're going to love them even when they really let you down, cause you pain, and maybe hurt you deeply. But hopefully there's also times when they bring you great joy. I would hope there are a lot of those. And happiness and celebration. But when someone, here's Brandon, Jason, my other son-in-law, marry my daughters, I took them as well. I pray for them too, and I love them. And I want them to do well, and I want them to take care of my daughters, my children, my grandchildren. Don't you do the same thing? Won't you, if you don't have grandchildren yet, do the same thing? For those you have not yet seen? David's and Mephibosheth's story is so powerful. In much the same way God loves every one of us for his son's sake, we don't have to earn his love. We already have his love. Isn't that great? Even those that are going to hurt us, you already love them. You can't help yourself because we just do, don't we? And I can tell you I've made decisions that I thought were helping my family. It probably hindered them because I wanted to take care of them and I wanted to relieve them from any problems they were having, any misery, any trouble. Because all I could think about was I don't like to see them hurt. Maybe you've done the same thing. And maybe you're in that spot right now in your life. They've hurt you, but you can't help but love them, right? I know there's some here today whose children aren't quite everything they want them to be as far as responding to you, including you, but you will love them because your heart knows no different. Now, think about God. Whatever we've done on our journey, when we've been in that far country and we haven't let ourselves come close to him, or we didn't even look for him at times in our life, what did he do? How did you get here today to where you are? He found you. He found you, and he told you of his love, and he showed it to you, maybe through the witness of someone who was speaking with you, or whose life you admired in their faith. This is why you and I must keep on faithful. Someone might just watch us while they're in far country, somewhere far away. They might just watch a Christian like you and want to know why you're like you are. Why do you have joy when you have trouble? Why do you have hope when there's sorrow and misery at times and life isn't perfect? And you'll get the chance to tell them, I too, my friend, was on a journey and I was far from God. But he found me. He still found me. I know you have testimonies like that in this church. I know some of yours. Not all of them. But even if you grew up in a church home and you didn't make him your personal Savior, somewhere along the way he found you, I would pray and hope. Too many people admire Grandpa and Grandma's faith, but they don't have it themselves. They hear about it from Dad and Mom. Maybe Dad and Mom weren't consistent, and that caused a great conflict in the kids' minds. If this is so important, Mom and Dad, why aren't we pursuing it more in our house? Why isn't it more important to us that we be found? And you'll have to answer that as parents and as grandparents. If you remember how you were found by God, you'd have to want the same for everybody you ever knew if you really, truly loved them. Because there's nothing more important, more that matters, than that they find that Jesus finds them and they're glad to be found. The story of Mephibosheth has a happy ending, and our story too can have a happy ending because, like Mephibosheth, we will someday dine at the king's table. You and I will sit at the banquet table with the Lord Almighty after the resurrection of our bodies, and we're in heaven with him. Can you imagine what that's going to be like? Sitting at that table with the Lord and seeing all the people that are there, and the table just goes on and on and on and on of people who are found by the Lord, who let him have his way with them in their life, and they yielded to his will. And you're welcomed home. And like David said, Mephibosheth would sit at his table and eat all the days of his life. God said that to us. Throughout eternity, you will supper with me. My friends, that's a reality. That's not just a story to tell people to make them feel warm and fuzzy. That's reality for the person who's been found and accepted that finding, accepted what God had to offer. When you sit at his table and feast with him, it's forever when that day comes. So what will we do now, I guess, while we live? Will we come to the table? Will we let him find us faithful? That's what he's asking. Revelation 2:10, I've quoted it many times over the years. Remain faithful until death, and I'll give you a crown of life. Till death, not for a season, not for a month or two, not for a few years. Remain faithful until death. Because you're not going to buy favor in heaven with 5 years of service and the rest not. Nor do you buy anything for that matter. He gave it to you, but you have to respond. My response is to remain faithful the rest of my life, so I know that it's a real gift. And it's lived out throughout my life, and yours is too. Lastly this morning, Mephibosheth is restored to the king's table, is what I'm alluding to, I guess, based on verses 10 through 13. As for Mephibosheth, it says in the one verse, 11, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. And we will sit at the great banquet table just like he did. We have to say that. The bride and the lamb will be united in heaven. The church and Jesus Christ will be together on that eternal feast. And how good and important it is to know that the groom will bring the bride to the feast. He will find us and take us home. Jesus is going to come back, my friends, grab up his bride. He'll find us wherever we're living. He'll say, okay, you are still part of my family. You've remained faithful. Come, we're going to go home and feast with the Father. I'm going to introduce you to him myself. Oh my. Is there anybody here who doesn't want to do that? Is there anybody here that wants to go and leave their family behind? Do you want your children to have that? Your spouse? We better get serious about our faith. We better speak when we have a chance. We better take every opportunity to tell people about a banquet they have yet to behold and help them get into a position that they're willingly glad to let God find them and bring them back to him if they've been lost, or to find them for the first time, lost in their sins, and willing to be taken into the shelter from the storm of this life and eat with him forever. Methibosheth is restored to the king's table, even though he was Saul's grandson, and they were at war with David. David is so ready because his heart is so prepared to say, that's in the past. What about today? Let's start today. Let's start today. I'll be your friend. I'll show you what I've learned. I'll mentor you. That's what he's saying. This much younger person than himself. I will help you find your way so that when God seeks you, you can respond and let him find you. Not that he doesn't know where you are, but you'll be doing it of your own free will. How good and important it is to know that the groom will bring the bride to the feast, and she will be adorned in white, spotless garments provided by the groom. Everything the bride enjoys comes at the expense of the groom. For Jesus will take care of us. Friends, we are the bride of Christ. Jesus has set a place at his banquet table, and the placemat has your name on it. Can you imagine that? Oh, right over here is your seat, sir. This one's marker when you sit there. Mike Pepper, there's your seat right there. Alan Worley, got one for you right here. Wayne Hoyt, sit by him. And he speaks, and we smile, and we celebrate, and we rejoice. We've been found. We stayed true. And we enjoy the eternal banquet forever. Why wouldn't we want to take that chance and that hope by how we live today, that that's true? Because certainly if it's not, we're still lost. And there's nothing to look forward to but death and darkness. As for David, what a friend he was. He kept his word to Jonathan. Jonathan had died. It'd be easy to say, well, he's not here anymore. He's not going to worry too much about it now. I know people who say those things to people. They'll make promises, but they won't keep them because it's like, well, now that they're gone, here's how I'd really like to do this or do that. And I've seen people, families do this with their funeral arrangements. I can remember someone saying to their family, do this for me. If I went to visit them in the hospital, and one of the last things they said was, I want this at my service. And then the family said, well, okay, we know he or she said that, but I think this would be better. No. It might be weird. Hopefully it's not anti-Christian, of course. But you'd want to keep your word because God kept his to you when he made you his friend. Your place at the banquet table was secured by the blood of the Lamb. Jonathan was not there to see it, but Methibosheth was a recipient of a kindness kindled by a strong friendship between David and Jonathan many years before. I hope that my family, all my friends out there in this world, are friends to my kids when I'm gone. That Bethany and Brooke and all my grandchildren, I got 9 precious ones, I just love them. And they make me smile every time I'm around them. And they're funny. And they're precious. And every single one of them still sits on my lap, and no matter how old they get, gives me a hug and says, hey, Papa, how are you? And I guess I'm saying because they mean so much to me, I'd want to know that if I were gone in a week or two or next year, you all would remember my family I'd want to do the same for you if you asked me to. Friendship, it should be eternal. God made his that way. I close with this poem, a real short one by a lady named, and I bet you all know her, Thelma McDougal. Who all knows Thelma McDougal? Of course not. It says this: the shepherd has left the 99 and gone down after the one, into the darkness of the pit and away from the light of the sun, into the tangled wilds of sin, into the chill of despair, into the storms of unbelief, into the nighttime of care. Give praise, my soul, for his patience rare. Give thanks for his love divine. For I, who was once the 100th sheep, am back with the 99. That's friendship. And it's free, because God will come look for us even if we don't look for him. But I pray you do. Let's pray.